Good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, August 8th, and it is 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. My name is Jeffrey Campbell, and I am the Chief Health Officer at AIDS Foundation Houston, of course, right here in Houston, Texas. AFH is a 40-year-old organization. We are a 40-year-old HIV service organization. We are the oldest HIV service organization in the state of Texas. We provide a myriad of services from housing and supportive services to both people living with HIV as well as people who are vulnerable for the acquisition of HIV. We also provide prevention services, testing for HIV, gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia, and now hepatitis C. In 2017, we launched a PrEP clinic to provide what was then a once-a-day pill to prevent the acquisition of HIV. And that treatment has now morphed into also an injectable that folks who want to be on PrEP but don't really feel comfortable taking a pill every day, or they think they may forget it. It's a it's a every 2 month injection that prevents the acquisition of HIV. We also provide services for priority populations in our Texas Department of Criminal Justice. We have a summer camp that happens in the month of July. For the last 3 years, we haven't had it due to our COVID-19 pandemic. But that summer camp focuses not just on children who are living with HIV, but also their siblings. And it is a fabulous, backed by popular demand event that we are excited to host every year. And the last 3 years, we didn't give up because we couldn't host an in-person camp. We did camp at home, and we mailed boxes of wonderful items to all of our campers across the nation, primarily in the South and Southeast of the nation. So we're doing some really great things here at AIDS Foundation Houston with the purpose of our mission to end the HIV epidemic in the greater Houston area. Tonight, we are going to talk about a new virus that's on the scene. The virus is not new, but the presence of the virus and the way that we're seeing it is new here in the United States. It's the monkeypox virus. And we thought it very important for us to come on tonight with two wonderful guests and talk about monkeypox as it is impacting us as a nation, a state, a county, and the city of Houston. Just want to share right quick a couple of things. We are going live now on Facebook, but this particular installment of Soul Talk will also be aired on the AFH website, which is afhouston.org, as well as our YouTube site or our YouTube page. So if someone doesn't get it tonight, you can go to Facebook and pick it up on the AIDS Foundation Houston Facebook page or my Facebook page, Jeffrey Campbell, or you can pick it up on our website or on our YouTube page. So we hope that you really gather some really good information tonight. I want you to know that this conversation is not just going to be about what are the symptoms of monkeypox, not going to be about how monkeypox is contracted. It's not just going to be about the vaccine. We're going to talk about the stigma that has immediately arisen in the way we are having conversations about monkeypox. We're also going to be talking about the how many people have been triggered because of how monkeypox is showing up in our gay and bisexual and other men who have sex with men population. So I'm very excited to have with us tonight two great guests. One is a new employee here at AIDS Foundation Houston, or AFH, Mr. Caleb Brown. Come on out, Caleb, who is our new community engagement coordinator for our PrEP program. Hey, Caleb, how are you? You're on mute, Caleb.
I am on mute. I'm good. How are you doing?
I am doing well. I'm doing
Great.
well. Good to see you, and thanks for creating a couple of hours after the end of our work day to come on and talk about monkeypox tonight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Caleb and I have been on the last 2 Fridays a town hall with the Harris County Public Health Department. They're doing these town halls now. It was just supposed to be one, then it was two, and now we're going to do it every Friday at noon Central Standard Time with Harris County Public Health,
Hmm.
talking about monkeypox, providing updates and information. Also, I want to welcome once again to the Soul Talk table, Dr. Daryl Shorter. Come on out, Daryl.
Hey, good to
Hey,
see you.
Daryl.
Thanks for
All
having me.
right. Great. Daryl is our medical doctor and also our psychiatrist. I love having Daryl on in any conversations that I do, because I think that in the depth of these conversations can be triggering. But we also need to learn things about how to address how we feel, how we react and respond to some of the things that are going on in the world today, whether it's something related to our mental health, our physical health, even our financial well-being. Throughout these last 3 years, it's been tough. So good evening, guys. Thank you for joining us. We do want to acknowledge, because we've all had a moment today, the passing of Olivia Newton-John at 73 years old. I couldn't believe that Caleb knew who she was, but I understood after he shared his point of reference. His parents are Olivia Newton-John fans, and such a presence, that has now left this physical place that we call Earth. But so we remember Olivia Newton-John on this evening. So, guys, we're here. We're going to talk about monkeypox. And Caleb, you have been a big part of the conversations that we have been having with Harris County Public Health. Would you kind of get us launched by talking about what monkeypox is, and what are some of the things that we're doing to test, vaccinate, and really the symptoms? I think that's really important.
Sure. And I'm sure Dr. Shorter can correct me if I'm wrong, but monkeypox is a zoonotic virus, which means that it comes from animals. It's in the smallpox family. It is not related at all to chickenpox. It is very, very different from chickenpox. So if people start to compare those, we got to make sure that we're looking at smallpox comparison rather than chickenpox comparison. It's very different. A few of those symptoms that we were talking about, most of the time people have a rash that'll go through several stages, including scabs. And then usually whenever those scabs fall off, that means that the healing process is done. And the rash can initially look like pimples or blisters, and they could be painful or pretty itchy. Some of the other symptoms of monkeypox include fever, chills, swollen lymph nodes, exhaustion, muscle aches and backache, headache, respiratory symptoms such as a sore throat, nasal congestion, or cough. And you may only experience a few of those symptoms, or you may experience all of them. Some people have the flu-like symptoms before the rash. Some of them get the rash first. Others only experience a rash. So there's a lot of different ways that people have these symptoms of monkeypox. And some of these symptoms are similar to COVID. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the testing that you're doing. If it's not COVID, maybe take a look at some other things as well, because it may not just be respiratory. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to those things as well. And we're finding that a lot of healthcare centers now are testing for monkeypox. So it's best to call those hotlines, which will have that information later. But that is the primary understanding of monkeypox right now is what we have.
Daryl, do you have something just from your expertise? Do you have something that you would like to add about what monkeypox is and how it's showing up?
Yeah, actually, I don't have much to add. Caleb did a really amazing job. I've been pulling information about this as well. I think it is important to kind of acknowledge that this is not our first go round with monkeypox here in the US. I think a lot of people are like, where is this coming from? And like, how are we dealing with it? Like, what? But it turns out that there was an outbreak of, or at least several cases of monkeypox back in 2003. And there was an outbreak of about 47 cases here in the US. So this isn't necessarily our first go around with monkeypox. It's not a new virus. It's actually been present for about 50 years, it looks like. So that the first human transmission, animal to human transmission, occurred about 50 years ago, but occurred primarily in Africa. And then we had that spat of cases that occurred in 2003, and now we are in this current round in 2022.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. So for both of you, and whichever one of you would like to ask, let's talk about transmission, because I think that's what a lot of people want to know. We're hearing different things, and so we want to know, transmission. How can I get monkeypox?
So go, Caleb. You go. Okay, I'll go first. So one of the first things that I think is kind of important to recognize, like Caleb said, this is a zoonotic virus, which means that the transmission really begins animal to human. But as of right now, it's not entirely known which animal sort of serves as the reservoir is the technical term, but like what animal serves as the conveyance to humans. We've seen it in, of course, monkeys, but also in rodents as well. And so that part of it has not yet been entirely worked out. Once in humans, however, there are a number of ways that it can be spread in terms of like respiratory droplets, in terms of contact with other people, including sexual contact, but not exclusive to. There's also an ability to transmit via clothing or surfaces. And so I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but some of the messaging around transmission has, I think, missed that there are these other ways that people might actually contract monkeypox because we've had a kind of we sort of jumped the gun in terms of, I think, the messaging around this. But I'll toss to Caleb. I'm sure he has something else to add as well.
Yeah, so I think you covered this really well. There's a lot of misinterpretation that monkeypox is an STI or a sexually transmitted infection, sexually transmitted disease, and it's not. And the main it can be transmitted during sex, but it's mostly that close proximity for an extended amount of time, which typically happens during sex. But it's not specifically during sex. There's no research to show that it's in seminal fluids or vaginal fluids. They're still doing that research. It may show up, but right now we don't have that information, and it's not specifically passed during sex, so it's not an STI. And I think that's just something important that we need to make sure that we bring to the forefront whenever we're talking about transmission.
Yeah, and I really would like for us to spend another 30 or 60 seconds on that, because I do think that the misinformed conversations are making it an STI, a sexually transmitted infection. But when we really have the conversation about probably the number one way monkeypox is transmitted is skin to skin contact. Yeah. There's a lot of different ways that we can have skin-to-skin contact, particularly with someone who has a lesion that they don't know about. It could be a prolonged handshake. It could be a prolonged hug. It could be in the subway. It could be on a crowded bus. It could be, anywhere where we're standing in a crowd and we're, I think, having prolonged skin-to-skin contact with someone. And then, I don't know of a way that we can have sex with another person where there's not skin to skin contact. But and that doesn't even have to be penetrative sex. Between a man and a woman, or between, between two people. It doesn't have to be penetrative sex between two people in order for us, we got to have some skin to skin contact. And if one of those persons is living with monkeypox in that moment, there's a high probability that they're going to transmit it to the other person that they're engaging in that skin to skin contact. We do call it something. We call it frottage. That rubbing together of the two bodies without penetration. So it's got a name, and it's pretty hot too. And we want to say that because we want this to be, a sex positive environment, and we don't want to, shame people or each other about what we do. And we're going to talk about that a little later too. So Gerald, you mentioned the droplets. So can you talk about that? What is that? A sneeze? Is it a cough?
Yeah. So it seems that this is, I mean, like I said, I'm trying to get up to speed with everybody else on this, but so I was sort of, I guess, also kind of surprised by the droplet aspect of this, because we've been, Caleb talked about COVID and some of the overlap in terms of the kinds of symptoms that people might experience if they're having sort of the flu-like symptoms, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, droplets are able to sort of convey the virus as well. It doesn't seem that they travel quite as far. I mean, in terms of the size and the configuration, like the genetic configuration of these droplets is such that they don't really spread quite as easily as we have experienced over the last couple of years with COVID. So I think that that's something for people to be aware of, but not necessarily to be to sort of maybe have that same sort of heightened level of intense fear around when it comes to the respiratory droplet. I mean, with this last variant of COVID, which we know BA.5, which we know is highly, highly contagious, is a kind of respiratory virus that has an easier ability to be spread in terms of respiratory droplets.
Sure. Thank you for that, because I know I definitely needed to hear that about the respiratory droplets. I think that's very important for us to know. What about clothing? Is that sheets and towels and clothing? Can we talk about that a little bit, either one of you?
Yeah, so I'll say something about that as well. It does look like direct contact with body fluids as well as lesions is a big part of the human to human contact. And I've seen a couple of like sort of varying reports about the clothing piece. But in one of the most recent articles, and I'm just going to my papers right now while I have them, they do talk about close contact with other folks that maybe live in a household, other types of close contact. So if you're in a house with someone who has monkeypox, you might be perhaps a bit more at risk because the virus may be on certain surfaces, including things like clothing or sheets. So we're just going to continue to talk while we wait for Jeffrey to get back.
That works for me.
I think you probably want to add in something as what I just said, Caleb.
Yeah, that's right. I think everything you've been talking about is great. I know one of the ways that we've been talking about transmission was prevention methods. So I think that's something that people need to understand as well. Making sure that you're avoiding close skin-to-skin contact with people who have a rash that looks like monkeypox, which those can look like lesions, those can look like bumps. Some people have it centralized in some areas, others have a rash, going up and down a larger area.
And Caleb, when you say rash, because rashes can be a lot of different things, you know what I mean? So maybe talk a little bit about what the rash it looks like too.
Sure. The rashes that we've seen so far look a lot like pimples, but they're a little bit bigger, kind of like almost blister-ish. But they do, not like a small whitehead or anything, but they do look like a large pimple.
Can people pop them?
That is not something that I have experienced.
Okay. Because they're so painful. Is it that what people?
Yeah. It's usually followed with pain or itching. So it's not something that I'm sure many people would want to try to drain themselves.
Okay.
Um,
When I think about the pictures of it that I've seen, I do see kind of collections of bumps. You know, you were sort of talking about that.
Yeah. So some people have had it kind of centralized in certain areas. Some people around their mouths, some people around their genitals. Some people just have it on their hands. But I've seen pictures of it too, to where it does spread all over the palms and up the arm, just depending on, I suppose the amount of contact they've had.
Yeah.
So.
And how long? I'm sorry. And how long do they have the pimples? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So let's take a look at that. I did have that pulled up. Usually it's about 2 to 3 weeks, I believe it is. Yeah, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to heal.
Okay.
Because I know the quarantine, the recommendation is 21 days.
Okay.
From the start of the symptoms.
Okay, that sounds about right. Okay, so yeah, so it looks like you can get rash after 1 to 3 days. And it looks like it kind of, we're having a power outage. It looks like we're kind of, like it sort of progresses from macules, which are these sort of flat kinds of bumps, to papules, which are raised.
Yeah.
But not, and then vesicles. Vesicles look like these things that have kind of fluid in them. And maybe that's where I was sort of thinking that people might want to pop them, or like a pimple or something like that. And then they become pustules, where they have like pus in them, and they may be expressed. And that's what you were talking about in terms of like the lesion. And then they kind of scab over. And at that point is when when you're a little less contagious. Is that right?
Right. Whenever it scabs over and they fall off. That's usually whenever the healing process is finished. It's whenever the scabs are gone.
Okay. So if I'm quarantining, you know, if I have monkeypox, I'm quarantining. Am I going to need to stay at home that entire 21 days? Like, what are the recommendations regarding that?
So that's what I've been hearing. You know, that's what has come out from the CDC, is making sure that you're staying quarantined, you're avoiding contact with other people. You know, to be safe, make sure you're wearing a mask as well. You know, because we wouldn't want any sort of co-infection or even spreading that in any way. But yeah, the recommendation is to quarantine. And I've known quite a few people, you know, off the top of my head, that have had monkeypox recently, and they've made sure to stay home. They haven't been interacting with other people. They haven't been sharing bedclothes or towels or anything with people, kind of like what we were talking about. So it is recommended that you quarantine and keep to yourself for that period of time.
So I actually have a little bit more of a complicated question for you now. So we are in an age and in a phase of life, especially when it comes to HIPAA and people, you know. So I guess where I'm going is, it has become customary for an employee who gets a particular kind of illness, a respiratory illness, to divulge to their employer, I tested positive for COVID, I did not test positive for COVID, that sort of thing. What are, and this sort of thought that, like, all right, if I get COVID, I know I'm going to be out of work for 1 day, 3 days, 5 days, depending on what the job, or I have to come back in with a negative test.
Yeah.
What are we thinking about when it comes to monkeypox and our responsibilities for reporting to the workplace? What if, you know, and I don't know the answer to this, but I was thinking about it as you were talking.
I'm not sure of the answer either, because we do have privacy as people with our own health disparities. You know, what we share and what we keep to ourselves should be personal. In my opinion, I do think that if there has been a potential exposure, it is your responsibility to speak with people about that. But you know, if there isn't a problem, you know, if you haven't come in contact with somebody, so say that you have your own office, you haven't really been shaking hands or talking to other people, or, you know, being in that close contact, you know, maybe it's just HR that you have to reach out to. Maybe it's your directors that you need to reach out to in order to have that conversation. So that way there can be an alternative work plan that's worked on. And, you know, just saying, oh yeah, you know, Caleb's not going to be in for the next week or two because he's got some things going on at home that he needs to take care of. And just making sure that, you know, employers understand those privacy that privacy as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I was actually just thinking about kind of a privilege that comes with having certain types of jobs that would allow someone to work from home, where they would still be able to perhaps stay engaged with work, not have to use sick days. Not everybody even has
Right.
2 weeks of sick leave, 3 weeks of sick leave if you have to be out for that period of time. And so trying to think through how to support members of the community who may not necessarily have access to those types of work related privileges is something I think we'll also have to wrestle with moving forward.
Right. And I think that goes back to prevention. If people can understand how to take those preventative measures and are really diligent with those preventative measures of avoiding close skin to skin contact, not kissing, hugging, cuddling, having sex with someone with monkeypox, or avoiding contact with objects and materials that a person with monkeypox has used. You may not know this, but there are certain behaviors that we can take a look at. And I mean, if we could, for the next month or two, just kind of back off some of those behaviors, we're going to reduce the risk of exposure so much to where we won't have to worry about people who don't have that time off. But that's where the prevention comes in.
Yeah, I think your point is really well made, and it's interesting because around the time of the start of COVID, we were having this conversation. We all remember March and April and May of 2020. Yep. Where basically people were supposed to just practice celibacy until we knew anything. And granted, like, it was an awful, I mean, I talk about PTSD. I still have like nightmares and all kinds of avoidance behaviors, about which we're probably going to talk about later, are related to the start of COVID and just how terribly awful it was. And so it feels a little strange now to be asking people to once again kind of step back and step away from maybe more intimate contact when people have been feeling so stressed out and sort of starved for intimacy over the last couple of years anyway.
Sure. And this is something that I brought up at the town hall. A lot of people, especially in the queer community, the LGBTQIA community, they're seeing this recommendation as homophobic because they're being told not to engage in these behaviors. And, I understand. I understand whenever somebody tells me not to do something, I'm just like, excuse me, I have every right. But it is something that we have to look at from a public health perspective and not a personal perspective. And I think that in the community we have to be open to those things of going, just for a moment, if we can take care of ourselves and we can take care of other people, because that's what it is. Taking care of ourselves is taking care of other people, and taking care of other people is taking care of ourselves. If we can look at it that way, rather than going, no, I want to go hook up, I want to go cuddle, I want to do my thing, we're going to continue encountering these risks.
Yeah.
You guys are doing a great job. And for the audience, the electricity went out here in the office. So boom. And it took my my desktop forever to come back up, but I was able to hear you all through another device. So you all are doing a great job. Thank you. I do want to go back to something that Daryl said, and Caleb, you responded to, just about HIPAA and reporting this information to work. I know one of the things here that at AFH, we spent a lot of time at the beginning of the COVID pandemic developing an effective way to report when you either had been exposed or thought you'd been exposed to COVID, or you had a COVID diagnosis. And it really was a direct communication to HR rather than communicating with your immediate supervisor. Eventually, your immediate supervisor would get a note that you were going to be out for X amount of days. And those days changed over time as we knew more and more about COVID. But we still do have a very sort of straightforward way of who to report to, and then how HR handles that information without sharing, your health diagnosis. And I know that, we will use that same type of reporting mechanism if in the case that someone here is exposed to or potentially has contracted a case of monkeypox. And that is very important. And it's also very important that you both mentioned, and I think, Daryl, I heard you mention that everybody don't have 3 weeks to take off. And that has been one of the challenges with COVID in, I think it's maybe depending upon how severe the COVID diagnosis is, it may be a little easier to go to work when you're working a job that only pays you when you're there. But you don't get paid when you're not there. And so a lot of folks in particular communities had to make decisions. Am I going to not go to work and not, be able to pay my rent, pay my electricity bill, keep my phone on, keep my children clothed, or am I going to go to work? I think I feel good enough to go to work. And that's an unfortunate space for us to have to live in. That's an unfortunate decision for us to have to make. And, monkeypox is a little different depending upon, again, the case, because it doesn't show up in everybody the same way. I'm sharing with someone the other day who had only four of the pimples, and they never blossomed out into something that we've been seeing on TV. That's a possibility. Could that person have gone to work in that situation? Maybe a little tiny outbreak of acne. So maybe so, but these are conversations that we have to have and understand the level of basically the how it's transmitted, understanding isolation. And I think, from the beginning, when someone even potentially thinks that they've been exposed, just to begin isolating in that moment. I remember early on, I remember it was Friday, March 13th, 2020. I got a call here at work that I had potentially been exposed to someone with COVID. I didn't even talk to anybody. I got my bag and I went out the back way because we didn't know a lot about COVID at that time. I just knew that I needed to isolate. And I think we need to address monkeypox in a very similar way. Get to a place where you're not around anyone. You've been touching on this isolation piece, and I've used the word thank you. Yeah, man. Somebody just made a comment, a compliment to you, Caleb. That's very important. Before we get to isolation and so forth, I do want to talk about the vaccine, because the vaccine, we know that we had vaccines stockpiled, but not a whole lot when it comes to the population in our nation. But the vaccines are being distributed, and it seems as though they're being distributed via CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, to areas based on the prevalence of the new diagnoses. So we saw some cities get the vaccine before others did, but we do have vaccines now in Houston, Harris County. You can call either one of the hotlines to set up an appointment to get a vaccine. However, there are some criteria. So let's go with the criteria first. Caleb, you want to talk about the criteria that we have right now here in Houston?
Sure. So the criteria that we have right now, there are a couple of things. One of them is that you've had a recent exposure to someone with a confirmed case of monkeypox. The second is that you have visited a sex venue such as a club or a bathhouse or any sort of organized sex event. The third is that you're on pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV or PrEP. So those are the stipulations right now for whenever you're calling for your vaccine. There's also if you have been diagnosed with an STI, chlamydia, gonorrhea, or syphilis in the last 3 months. Those are the criteria for being able to get the monkeypox vaccine, or if you're showing signs or symptoms of having monkeypox.
Right. So exposure,
Mm-hmm.
An STI diagnosis within the last 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
if you're on pre-exposure prophylaxis or PrEP,
Mm-hmm.
and if you've been to a sex venue bathhouse, a sex party, as you said, an organized sex party, or if it's a disorganized sex party, but a sex party. If any one of those particular four instances, you do qualify according to the Houston City of Houston Health Department and Harris County's current protocol for the distribution of the vaccine. Tell us, either one of you, or I'll say this and then we'll go on. But there's the vaccine itself. It's 2 shots. I've had my first shot. They give it to you in the back of your arm rather than in the alleged muscle part of your arm. It's in the back of your arm. You don't really feel it. You can have some fatigue, maybe a mild fever after you get the vaccine. I didn't have either. I actually got a knot in my arm. It wasn't a hard knot, but it was a knot. And but I had no fever. I had no fatigue. That knot was at the point of the injection, and it was sore, not pain, but sore for a few days, and it's gradually going away. And so that was my first shot. Now my next shot is set up for 30 days after my first shot. So somewhere around September 6th, I'll get my second shot. And no, I'm sorry, August 28th. August 28th, I'll get my second shot. And then based on the protocol, you have you're fully inoculated 2 weeks after your second shot. So that's when it's supposed to work at 100%. It's supposed to be, firing at all pistons 2 weeks after your second shot. You do have some protection after the first shot and even immediately after the second shot, but your full inoculation is 2 weeks after that second shot. I am recommending anybody that does anything, regardless of how you show up in the world regarding your gender or your sexual orientation, sexual identity, get the shot, get the vaccine. Somebody asked, why did you get it? I got it because I don't want monkeypox. It's just that simple. That's the same reason I got the COVID-19 vaccine, because I don't want COVID. So for me, it is that simple. But I did grow up with nurses. And so, I've been vaccinated, and I grew up at a time when, we got vaccinated for everything. I'm old enough to have had the smallpox vaccine. So those are things, for me that make getting vaccinated very, very important. And I would say easy. And I know that's not everybody's, I know that's not everybody's thought process. But if we could, let's put up those numbers for the hotlines to call and get your vaccine set up. Let's see which one is going to pop up. Okay, Harris County Public Health Hotline, 832-927-0707. 832-927-0707. This is Harris County Public Health. They do have the vaccine. Also, the Houston Health Department hotline, 832-393-4220. 393-4220. That's the Houston Health Department hotline. And these hotlines are not just for information around the vaccine. It's to report if you're symptomatic, to get information if you're symptomatic, if you think you've been exposed. Both of these health departments have really great monkeypox prevention landing pages for us to go to. Just Google either Houston Health Department monkeypox or Harris County Public Health monkeypox, and that'll take you right to those landing pages where you'll get the number of monkeypox diagnoses within the city or the county. You'll get information, these hotlines, information about transmission, information about symptoms. I did go on the Houston Health Department webpage just before this show started. And as of the last posting here in Houston, we have 177 diagnosed cases of monkeypox that the health department is aware of in Houston, Texas. That does not include the unincorporated areas of Harris County, but that's a smaller number. But we do know that we do have cases in unincorporated Harris County. Anything on the vaccine, Daryl or Caleb? Anything on that?
Go, Caleb.
I did want to say, because I know we had talked about the encouragement of getting the vaccine, and I want to second that. I think vaccination is supremely important. If you have questions about the vaccine and you're wanting to know more information, please make sure that you're utilizing these resources to get accurate, factual information. Vaccines.
Yeah.
Do not let myths. We don't want you to get conspiracy theories. We want you to make sure that you have an educated understanding of the vaccines so you can make the best choices for your own health. So please make sure that you're checking out those resources that Jeffrey mentioned.
Thank you. Daryl?
Yeah, I also agree with vaccination. This is one of the challenging things, though. So if I am on PrEP, how do I prove that I'm on PrEP in order to obtain the vaccine? Is it enough that I just I just have to say I'm on PrEP? That's my first question.
Do you want me to
don't work on that side of the world, but I don't think they're asking for people for their PrEP prescriptions. Yeah.
So as part of the screening process, they are telling you to bring a picture or the bottle with you. Whenever I went
health
to get
departments or just one?
I'm sorry, the city of Houston Health Department is asking.
Okay.
Excuse me, they're asking that you bring. Houston Health Department. The last time we called, but whenever you go to get your vaccine, all of the reports I've had, they're not asking when you get there, so they're going based off of the honor system.
Okay, that's actually very helpful. And the second thing is, say I am sexually active, but I have not been to a bathhouse or sex club or sex party. What should I do, and how can I qualify? I guess is the question that I'm asking. Yeah.
I think that you do what you need to do to get this vaccine right now. I understand the protocol. I completely understand. And the protocol is really about the limited amount of vaccines that we have. However, I also think the protocol is stigmatizing. I think the protocol causes us to miss some people. As I was processing this call or this installment, one of the things that I thought about was, remember when PrEP first came out in 2012, and people who were on PrEP were called PrEP whores or Truvada whores, because the perception was if you were on PrEP, you were having multiple sex partners and multiple condomless sex partners, and that's not the case. So but PrEP, using PrEP as a qualifier, takes us right back to PrEP whore and Truvada whore. So go ahead, Daryl.
So this is the interesting part of the conversation that I think really brings in the mental health aspect of it. We're talking about stigma. I'm going to toss to you, Caleb, but I feel like we're all a little bit on the same page about this when we talk about the requirements in order to obtain the vaccine, which is essentially why I'm asking the question, because you list STI in the last 3 months, I'm on PrEP, or I've been to a sex club, or I've been exposed. It's like, okay, well, what exactly are we communicating about who we feel is most vulnerable or who should have access and so forth. So
Caleb's just
and there's been a lot of conversation. There's been a lot of conversation from people with HIV who. So let me start by saying there is no research that shows right now that people with HIV with an undetectable viral load and a an uncompromised immune system is at any greater risk. We'll start there. People with a compromised immune system who are in HIV stage 3, who have a high viral load, there is concern there for co-infection. So we'll start there. Okay. But the people with HIV who are trying to get the vaccine, they do feel discriminated against. And I completely understand, because I had that feeling too. And I, as a person with HIV, I was like, excuse me, like, how do you know I'm not having just as much, if not more, sex than someone who's on PrEP? So there's this misunderstanding of, I'm going to call it sexual health assessment. I don't want to call it risk assessment. Assessment. In order to, if we're
Caleb, you're cutting out, unfortunately. Is he cutting out for you, Daryl, or is it just me?
Yeah, he's cutting out for me.
No,
You get into the
goodness. Okay, let me try.
I know.
I can hear all of you just fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you were cutting out, but you're better now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, so I'll start kind of where I think I left off.
The assessment. Start
if
there.
we're trying the assessment, yes. So if we're looking at a sexual health assessment as a qualifier to get the vaccine, I still think that's stigmatized messaging. Because we're still looking at this. I mean, if we're looking at behavioral risk, then sure. But whenever we're trying to qualify PrEP versus ART versus going to a bathhouse, that is an issue. And I think that there are still conversations to be had with our public health leaders at the health department and at Harris County Public Health that we're hoping to be having soon, because there are members of the community that are saying, I feel mocked, I feel discriminated against. Well, no, I'm not on PrEP, not eligible. Because in a not stigmatized, in an attempt to not stigmatize people with HIV by saying, well, we don't want to say that people with HIV are having a lot of sex, they are saying that people on PrEP are having a lot of sex. So in an attempt to not stigmatize people with HIV, they've marginalized the community. So, and I'm not saying this was done on purpose, because I know, from having the conversations with these healthcare leaders, their intention is, I think, trying to do the best that they can. The impact, a little different. Yeah. So, Dr. Shorter, I think you're bringing up a good point, and it's definitely a conversation that has been had. It raises the concerns have been raised from members of the community, from healthcare professionals. So it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had, to where we look at those qualifiers for the vaccine and say, maybe not quite so much. Maybe we don't take this avenue.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with a friend in another city.
Dr. Nicomi.
Yes.
Yes, Roger.
So I was having a conversation with a friend, and he was short. So he's like, so is this an STI or not? Like there's just so much confusion. There's been so much confusion around the messaging, and then you get these different criteria for vaccination, and it varies from like city to city, county to county, state to state. And so there's just so much confusion, I think, for folks out there. So I think it's really helpful to try to clarify for folks that are at home. Yes, we think everybody should get the vaccine. There is a sort of like, I know people are doing what they need to do in order to get it.
Right. And I did want to recognize the comment that just came through from Dr. Nakomi. In my mind, yes, everyone needs to go get the vaccine for monkeypox. But it is also one of those to where, like, if you recognize, that you're at low risk because you're like, well, I'm just going to the grocery store, I'm just hanging out with family, there's not a lot going on. If you understand that and you're in a place where you're just like, I don't think I'm at risk. I don't think that this is, this health concern, it is still minimal at this point. It is a health emergency based off of the federal government, but that just means that money is being put into this now. It doesn't mean that there's a huge number of cases. What we're looking at is we can assess our own health, right? And if you assess your own health and you go, I'm pretty sure I'm at low risk based off of the means of transmission, based off of, the way you go about your everyday life, based off of your behaviors and what you know, then I would factor that into my decision on whether or not to get the vaccine. I say as a preventative measure, because I am all about prevention. In any sort of health disparity, I think prevention is the best medicine. I say yes, get the vaccine. But whenever you're assessing your own behaviors, your own choices that you're making as you're going through your day, I would let that factor into the decision as well.
Right. To thine own self be true. I was in a thread the other day on social media, and it was a younger person who said, "This sounds like the AIDS epidemic," and I said, "No, it's not." And he asked me to elaborate, and I did, but I do want us to talk about that, the three of us, because it is triggering, but it's not the same thing. And I think we need to spell out to our audience why it's not. Daryl?
Yeah, I mean, you and I were talking about this last week as well. I mean, the reality is that people are deeply triggered from both the earliest and sort of middle phases of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, 80s, 90s, as well as people being triggered all over again from the last couple of years as it relates to COVID. I mean, the reality is that we've been living in kind of almost like a fight, flight, or free stage as it relates to a public health for the last 2.5 years, basically. So of course, people are on edge. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of sadness. There's been a lot of isolation and loneliness as a result of COVID, as well as people really having to work with and evaluate the risks that they are willing to take. And then sort of making decisions like, damn it all. That's not the word that they use. They use a different 4-letter word, but they're basically like, damn it all. I don't care anymore. And almost having to make a completely different reaction around these types of things. So like, I don't want to give a crap about COVID because it has so negatively impacted my life in all of these various ways in my relationships and so forth. So I also, by extension, am now going to loop monkeypox in this, and I'm not going to give a crap about that either, which is kind of it's sort of a trauma reaction in many ways. So I think it really is critically important that we talk about sort of the anxiety that comes up as a result of it. Some people are crippled. Horrible word to use. I apologize about that. Some people are really negatively impacted by their own anxiety. Much better word. So I apologize about that. So as a result of their anxiety, they find themselves avoiding things, avoiding people, avoiding places, and their activities become smaller. Their circle becomes smaller as a result of this anxiety. Other people have kind of the opposite reaction, where if they become anxious, they power through it, they barrel through it, they sort of impulsively go for it, right? They're just going to, like, again, I'm not going to give a crap. And that can also have a sort of negative impact for people as well. So I think just one, recognizing that anxiety is a normal, natural part of being a human being, that we all experience the nerves and the anxiety, and sort of acknowledging that, like, this is our collective experience right now. That's the first thing. Then the second thing, I think, is to try to bring it down a little bit. And how do you do that? Well, I think we try to do some of the grounding exercises that hopefully we began to practice during the earliest parts of COVID, when we were all like completely losing it and trying to figure out sort of like how to make sense of the world. So that could look like exercise or walking. Although if you're going to go walking, in Houston, you need to do it before the sun comes up, because it's 1,000 degrees outside. Or if you're really super brave and you want to walk in all this heat, God bless you. Sure. So walking, exercising, making sure you're getting good sleep, setting a bedtime for yourself if that needs to be a part of your journey, yoga, meditation, mindfulness. You know me, I love a good podcast, a good relaxation podcast. I have a ton of those that I could recommend for the audience as well. So really trying to bring it down, because I think what we're seeing is a sort of a re-traumatization, to borrow from Uncle Clifford from P-Valley, for all my P-Valley folks out there. We're sort of re-traumatized with this most recent bout of illness.
Caleb?
Yeah, and I think whenever we're talking about sort of the trauma that people are feeling, whenever they say, oh, it's like the AIDS epidemic all over again, I never said those words, but what I said was, I guess we've not learned anything in 40 years. Whenever it came from some of the messaging that was coming from trusted resources. Whenever it was, well, this is a men who have sex with men problem. No, And so I think, for me, whenever I'm looking at the messaging that's been used, the targeted messaging that's being used, it feels similar in a way, just from the research that I've done. I do understand that. What we have to remember is the differences between monkeypox and HIV/AIDS. We didn't even have a test for HIV/AIDS in the 80s. People were using tuberculosis tests to kind of get an idea of if that was the case. We didn't have a test for viral load until the 90s. It was decades before we were able to test for that. And we still don't have tests that are strong enough to read below 20 copies of a viral load. But for monkeypox, this is something that's been around. There's something that we already have a vaccine for. There have been no fatalities reported in the U.S., and it's rarely fatal. So we do need to understand the differences in the health disparities. I think where it comes from, the similarities that people are drawing from would be the messaging. And I think that it's important that we as a community go, we're not going to let the we're not going to be stigmatized anymore, because there are still people who say, well, HIV is a gay disease. No, it's not. And this can't be something where people say, well, monkeypox is a problem for gay men. Well, it's a problem for all of us. This is a much easier transmission. It depends on, like we said, our health assessment. So I think that's, for me, whenever I look at the messaging, I make sure to reach out to those people and say, I understand what you're trying to say. Reporting numbers of, well, 96% are in MSM. I made that number up, by the way. I'm not sure if that's the case, but whenever we see those things, it is concerning. Whereas whenever we talk about, here are the means of transmission, here are the means of prevention, we can target that message to certain communities. Like we say, well, whenever you go to market days, be careful, maybe get the vaccine, maybe pay attention, limit the hugs, limit the sex, limit this, just be careful. But we can also say to mothers in the grocery store, hey, maybe don't hug that friend that you haven't seen in a little while, because maybe they're carrying monkeypox. So I think it is up to us to make sure that the stigmatization is out of the messaging, so we don't repeat the same mistakes that we've made in the past.
Yeah, I think that, and certainly my messaging is get the vaccine, get it. Get the vaccine. I think that's so very important. And thank you both for sort of elaborating on the difference between what we're experiencing now with what we know and what has been declared by President Biden as a public health emergency, rather than what we've come to know as the HIV epidemic or the AIDS epidemic. They're two very different things that have impacted us very differently. And so thank you for pointing that out. Now I want to talk about, and we touched on it, but I want to take a deeper dive into it. If you know me, you know that I'm a fan of Gary Chapman's The 5 Love Languages. The 5 love languages are quality time, giving of gifts, acts of service, words of affirmation, and the number 5, and I'm just saying it's number 5 because that's where I want to land, is physical touch. There are so many people who thrive off of physical touch. That's not just sexual intercourse. That's cuddling. That's a hug. That's an extended hug, giving and receiving of that hug. It's sitting close to, where you're touching somebody. If you go to the movie and you want to sit next to, it don't even have to be somebody that you dating or in a relationship with or married. You just like physical touch. And Daryl and Caleb both, we've talked about this tonight. We've all talked about it, is first, that kind of got taken away from us during the COVID-19, the height of it. And now we're looking at this again. So, Daryl, I messaged Daryl yesterday, and I think I said it to Caleb today. I want us to talk about how these messages are impacting us around denying ourselves or being told that the thing that we love to do is what we can't do in order to stay healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said that beautifully, actually, and I'll toss to Caleb. Actually, I'll give it a go, Caleb.
So during the height of COVID, I worked from home. I, walked everywhere because I was living in the Heights, so everywhere that I needed to go was close by. COVID didn't impact my normal day-to-day life other than I didn't go to the gym. I couldn't go to the gym. I couldn't get my hair cut. Going to the grocery store was a bit of a pain. We couldn't go out. But the thing that I missed the most was hugging my friends, because it's the way I showed that I care. It's always been, ingrained in me that, I hug and kiss my parents every night before I went to bed. Because that was what we did. Because if we didn't wake up in the morning, the last thing we wanted to do was make sure that we told them that we loved them. And I think that is something that's very difficult to address whenever it's something that we do. Even just putting your hand on someone's shoulder to show a bit of comfort, to offer that support or that empathy, that sympathy, whatever the case may be. But I think something that we also have to keep in mind is, I have to be careful with the amount of beef that I eat, or else my cholesterol is going to go through the roof and I'm going to be at greater risk for heart disease.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same reason. Well, maybe we love a double cheeseburger from McDonald's, but we don't eat it every day. We have it as a treat. Now, granted, I'm not saying that physical touch should just be counted as a treat, because that's not the case. But, when we're looking at potentially stopping a very concerning health disparity, we have to find those ways to where we do show our love. So sending a card, sending a gift, words of affirmation, those other things that you talked about. It is very difficult, but we also have to keep in mind that there are other sacrifices that we make for health disparities that may be a lot longer. When we think of people with diabetes, they have to watch their sugar intake. And let me tell you something, if I have to watch my sugar intake ever in my life, I don't think I'll make it very long because my relationship with sugar is it's a little too deep, I think. But, when we're looking at the way that we show that we care about people, we do have to understand that we may have to just take a moment, and if it means that we get to hug them even more afterward, then it's going to be that much sweeter,
Yeah, I'd love to piggyback on that, actually, Caleb, because I think your point about showing up in our relationships in a different way and exercising our ability to connect and show intimacy and love for people in a different way is probably some of the work that we could stand to do, monkeypox or not, right? One of the reasons that people love the 5 love languages is because it helps them to understand their primary and sometimes their secondary love language within the context of a particular relationship. But the part that they sort of sometimes will forget is like, all right, well, I may be in a relationship with somebody else, with another person or persons who their love language is not the same as mine. So then I have to step out of my comfort zone and figure out how to show affection, love, connection, intimacy in a way that's different and that feels good to my partner or partners, right? So we do have to stretch sometimes, because not everybody's going to receive our love in the same way. And I think there's something nice about being able to kind of receive love in other ways. I think it opens us up to actually to a better experience overall. So I love what you said, Caleb, and I think that there is some room for us to stretch and grow as you wait for your vaccine to kick in, or as you make some different decisions about the amount of connection that you have with people of a physical touch nature, while the things kind of calm down or do whatever it is that they're going to do. And I'm going to say calm down because I'm sort of an eternal optimist.
Yeah. I like that. Thank you both for those comments around that particular part of this conversation because it really is important. And Caleb, thank you for owning, that if somebody tells you something you can't do, you're like, what do you mean? Who are you to tell me that I can't do something? Um, and I can be like that too. And
That's most of us.
that's most of us. I'm a diabetic, and so it is a little challenging to stay away from some things. I'm not gonna, go around, with a bowl of sugar, but I like a donut every now and then, and then just other things that that I like, really really sweet fruit. I love sweet tea, but I try not to drink it. Or a real soda. And when by real I mean not a diet or a zero soda, because I know that's what I have to do in order to stay healthy. And behavior change, even if it's only for a season, is a challenge. Any type of change, and most change really is rooted in a change in behavior. Um,
Right.
most of it. And so adaptation, thank you, Jermaine Ingram. That's my frat brother. Adaptation. Yeah. So sometimes we do have to adapt or adopt to something different in the meantime.
So I really love what you're saying, because essentially what you're talking about, Caleb and Jeffrey, like you're saying, these are skills that we have developed or should develop about health in general, right? So everybody, like most people that have ever heard me give a talk anywhere, know that I have a major potato chip issue. Like, there's a certain chili. They're not paying me to advertise for them, but there's a certain chili cheese kind of salty corn chip situation that I love and can consume by the entire bag. And I have high blood pressure and have to be really careful about my salt intake. And so I don't engage in that behavior as much anymore. But it's really, I think about us trying to say, like, okay, well, how can I make different decisions today about my health, like sort of putting money in my piggy bank for my future self, to like pay off on good health. But we do that, for all kinds of things. I think one of the reasons why we try very hard not to text and drive is because of the risk that it poses for our health. I mean, we can harm ourselves or other people. So we are constantly making decisions and calculations about health behaviors. This is just another aspect of that as well.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. Another aspect of behavior change and decisions about health and well-being and what we need to do again, I keep saying in the meantime. And for me, the in the meantime is until 2 weeks after that second shot kicks in and we're fully inoculated. I think it's important. I want to go back to the stigma thing. I've had a couple of things that have popped up in my head. I had a friend of mine who saw my Facebook post, I guess late last week, that had the numbers to both of the health departments. And he called me, I guess Saturday, and he's like, Jeffrey Campbell, why didn't you tell me I had to tell the people I was a whore in order to get the vaccine? And that is the perception that is being given. And let me be clear. I am a sex positive individual. I ain't mad at nobody that's having sex, whatever kind of way they want to have it. That works for me. However, because of how sex has been stigmatized through various means over our lifetimes, and sometimes it depends on our age, when you're asked, well, have you had an STI in the last 3 months? Have you been to a sex party? Have you been to a bathhouse? That sounds so stigmatizing because most people, when asked those questions on a sexual health test, sexual health assessment, won't answer that and say yes, even if it is their truth. So we do have to dig deeper in the public health realm and even in the private health realm, because we need to have these conversations, and destigmatize sex and all things that are potentially related to sex. And I want to say one more time that, and we've all said it tonight, monkeypox is not a sexually transmitted disease or infection. There are several ways that it can be transmitted. Skin to skin touch is probably the primary way, and you just can't have a lot of sex with another person without touching skin. That's just the reality of it. But we do have a vaccine. It is a 2-shot vaccine, and you're considered to be fully inoculated 2 weeks after that second shot. It's around 8:10. I want us to start wrapping up. So Caleb and Daryl, I want you guys to kind of give us some wrap-up points. I really appreciate you for being here with us tonight. If there's something you think we missed in the conversation, please feel free to pull it out of the air and share it. So let me start with Caleb.
So I just want to say I really appreciate the openness to the conversation that we've had tonight in regards to destigmatizing the messaging around monkeypox, bringing attention to some of the concerns that we have right now in our community, especially with even local health leaders that maybe are unintentional with their messaging. So I do appreciate that. I do appreciate the comments and questions people have been presenting throughout the feed. I've learned quite a bit, Dr. Shorter. The perspective that you bring, I've learned quite a bit. I just really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this and to continue getting that messaging out. There's nothing that I can really think of that we didn't cover, but I think we did a great job.
Thanks, Caleb. Daryl Shorter.
Yeah, Caleb, this has been fabulous. Thank you. I'm so glad to meet you virtually and to do this. I mean, this is one of the, I think, most positive things that's come out of COVID, and it's our ability to really connect with each other and also with audiences sort of near and far. I don't really have a lot more to add. I think really kind of trying to think through like our own anxieties about stuff, though, is where I find myself landing today. And I think that everything sort of always boils down to mental health and physical health for me are intricately linked. And so I guess I would encourage, in addition to your sexual health assessment at home, check in with yourself about how you're doing with your mental health too. This has been a really tough couple years, and stress seems to be going up, not down, for the majority of people that I talk to. Certainly in my practice, there's no shortage of folks coming in that are reporting increased depression, increased anxiety, increased alcohol use, or sort of developing kind of what they feel may be problematic or concerning behaviors related to their substance use. So this is really a time, I think, to like not only reflect on your sexual health and your behaviors, but really also like, how are you doing? And then sort of getting honest about that, and then maybe making some different connections with people in your support network, or seeking help if you really need to.
Right. And so, Daryl, I have one more question from the mental health perspective. How do we support each other during this spilling over from COVID into the monkeypox public health emergency?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, so I actually have a couple notes on that. I think what we do is we let people know that we are there to talk to them and support them, right? So I think we're kind of in a phase right now where it's not always entirely clear. Like we feel like, okay, I've talked so much to this person. I've told them so much about what's going on. I've leaned so much on my support network. They're burnt out. I'm burnt out. So, but continuing to like check in with folks and just say like, hey, this is a problematic point for me right now. Like my depression is up a little bit, or my mood is down a little bit, or my anxiety is up a little bit. Like, can we just reconnect and maybe not even necessarily talk so much about the problem, but kind of work and be active in the world as part of our solution? So I think that there's a way, we've been talking about health behaviors tonight. I think that there's also a space for us to connect with people in the real world, whatever that looks like for us, but in the real world in a way that can actually help to ratchet down some of the real distress that people are experiencing in the world. So that's sort of the first thing. If people find themselves isolating again, which is the thing that I kind of get concerned about as a mental health clinician, that people are going to decide, okay, I'm so anxious, I'm so fearful, that they begin to avoid again. That to me is a telltale sign. So check on your people. If you find that somebody's like not responding to text messages or emails or phone calls or messages like they used to, that might be a sign, okay, well, let me try to redouble my efforts. And not just to say like, sort of like, where you been, but really like, hey, I'm concerned about you. I've noticed a change in you as well. Can we check in? Let's do something together again in the real world. We could go to a park and sit and do nothing, but at least it's an opportunity for us to connect in a way, different type of love language, quality time, which is one of the first ones that you mentioned. But again, an opportunity to kind of like, again, like sort of create these connections with other people, because people have been feeling super isolated.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Look, Caleb and Daryl, I and AFH, we appreciate you both so much. And Franklin Moore, thank you for chiming in and for being with us on this evening. Really just appreciate this conversation. I can tell you that I've done several of these, and we have a question, and I want to get it answered from Jermaine Ingram. He tuned in late. He says, but how long generally does monkeypox last?
So the quarantine recommendation right now is 21 days. It can take anywhere between 4 and 14 days to have symptoms. But typically it's around 3 weeks that we're looking at the length of time that monkeypox is infectious.
Great. Thank you. So about 21 days. Jermaine, and thank you for asking that question. And we never mind, we do not mind stopping to give an answer. But Daryl and Caleb, thank you so much on behalf of our CEO, John Huckabee, here at AFH, and our team. Caleb, you're part of the team. Daryl, you're kind of part of the team because of our board chair. So thank you so much. And you guys are going to get zapped backstage. I'm going to do my closeout, and I'm going to come backstage, and we're going to do a quick closeout together. That's our usual process.